where there strung up a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Coffee is one of the most traded commodities on the stock market, second only to oil. To me, this isn't all that strange. Without coffee, there's no life. This makes me wonder, how did people exist before discovering coffee? There are some mysteries with no answers. Do aliens drink coffee? Does Sasquatch? Is there a coffee shop in heaven where the angels hang out? Coffee is magic, and the best coffee in the universe can be yours simply by going to 4501 McPherson and getting a cup of organic man coffee trike coffee. Your taste buds will thank you. If it's just too far to drive and that flying car that we were all told we would have is not sitting in your driveway, you can still make life far better by visiting organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Bad coffee is just evil. Don't forget to check out Trailer Trash Terrors and Vic Hermanson's many interesting voices. That's where you'll find Annabelle Lee, the creepy little girl that sings the intro and the exit music to my show. Saturday, August 17th, from 9 a.m. until 8 p.m., there will be the UFO Con in Jefferson, Texas. Daryl Sims, the alien hunter, will be the big guy speaker, along with Mitchell Whiting, Jay Michael, Dr. Rita Lewis, Daniel Allen Jones, he was on the show a couple of years ago, will be the MC as well as one of the speakers. If you've never heard Daniel speak, he has a lot of very interesting information about a lot of subjects. You got to hear Daniel. They're going to squeeze me in there somewhere, probably just before, just after lunch when most people are half asleep. But I will be there on stage talking about Laredo UFOs. There are quite a few of them. Live and in person. They're in Jefferson, Texas. August 17th, that's a Saturday. Jefferson, Texas is up there by Marshall, kind of the middle of nowhere, but it's a cool little town. That's where they have the Bigfoot conference every year as well. There's some fruit that just doesn't grow well in our country. Bananas, for example, and coffee, neither of which grows really well here in the U.S. If I could afford it, I would buy Ecuador and I would grow nothing but coffee. I would be in heaven. But I'm not rich, so I'm not going to. Bananas don't grow well in our country either. They like humid tropical climates, like nothing that we have here in Laredo. I am growing a couple of banana trees in my backyard, which is funny because they're not really trees. They're just really tall plants. Buy a banana, and it will look certainly, uh, it will almost certainly be a descent. Let me start that over. Buy a banana, and it will almost certainly be descended from one plant grown at an English estate. The Cavendish banana was exported all around the world to take the place of what many folks say was the best banana in the world. The Gros Michel, also known as the Big Mike. No, not that one. We're talking about fruit here. Now this one is yellow. I'm talking about bananas. Some folks' minds are in the gutter. The Big Mike, or Gras Michel, is a type of banana that originated from Southeast Asia and was introduced to the Americas during the colonial times. It quickly became one of the most popular varieties for commercial cultivation due to its constant size and flavor. I like bananas almost as much as the Minions. Anytime I'm at the grocery store and I pick up a bunch of bananas, I'll hold them up in the air and I will yell, "Banana!" And then my wife will pretend like she doesn't know who I am. A lot of people at the store pretend like I'm not there. The people working there all laugh because they've seen me do it so many times. What I really hate is I buy a bunch of yellow bananas and I take them home, and they're already turning funny colors when I set them on the counter. In a day or two, they're mushy, and they're not much fun to eat. Peel them and the goo runs down your arm. They're good for making banana bread, but you can't chop that up and put it in a peanut butter and banana sandwich, which I like a lot. Let me just state right here, I am not fond of communism. It's great as long as you're at the top, the elites running things. If you're one of the workers, you're not going to be happy. Communism looks great on paper, or while sitting in some college classroom, listening to some professor that has never had to work a day in his life in order to put food on the table. I hear college kids all the time yelling about the evils of capitalism. Capitalism isn't any more evil than a rock sitting by the side of the road. Hit somebody in the head with that rock, and then it becomes a weapon. Capitalism is making a product and selling it for money. Communism is getting somebody else to make a product and then taking it away from them and then selling it to make a profit. If this upsets you, you're either listening to the wrong school teachers or you're listening to the wrong podcast. Go somewhere else and listen to somebody that likes communism. I don't. Bananas are believed to have originated up to 10,000 years ago, and some scientists believe that they may have been the world's first fruit. Try to picture a banana tree as being the the forbidden fruit, the forbidden tree in the Garden of Eden. Here's Eve coming up to Adam. These are good. Anyway, now you can get that picture out of your mind. Bananas are indigenous to Asia and the Middle East. They were brought to the New World in the 15th and 16th centuries. The first bananas are thought to have grown in the region that includes the Malaya Peninsula, Indonesia, the Philippines, and New Guinea. From there, traders and travelers took them to India, Africa, and some Polynesian islands. Portuguese sailors brought bananas to Europe from West Africa in the early 15th century. Its Guinean name, Banima, became banana in English. After a few years of killing each other, nothing says victory like a banana. Bananas became very popular in the United States immediately after the Civil War. In the late 1800s, the Costa Rican government decided they wanted to build a railroad from the center of their country, where the capital sits, to the Caribbean coast. To achieve this, the government the government procured a substantial loan for the construction. The originator of that loan is lost to history, but I'll bet it was one of those international banks that we just love to hate. The complexities of railroad construction proved it to be quite challenging, leading to the depletion of the funds long before the project could be completed. Anytime a government decides to build anything, they put a bunch of bureaucrats in charge and they never bother to ask the builders if the project is even viable. Faced with the dilemma of an unfinished railroad and a drained bank account, the government encountered an opportunity in the form of an American investor, Minor Keith. Keith agreed to complete the railway in exchange for land concessions rather than monetary compensation. With a whole lot of land but no money, the government awarded Keith a land concession in 1884, which was about 9% of their territory, with a 99-year lease. This concession laid the groundwork for what would become the United Fruit Company. This initial venture served as a blueprint for the United Fruit Company's expansion across Latin America. As governments of the countries on either side of Costa Rica saw the benefits, free railroads for land the government didn't want, they wanted in on the freebies as well. Railroads were wanted and sometimes needed, and if some foreigner was willing to build it in exchange for some land that nobody wanted because it was all swampy and hot, why not? Railroads in exchange for bananas and a few other crops. Around the end of the Spanish American War, 1898, once Spain was no longer a power in the region, U.S. companies began to look into building businesses in all the southern countries. Soon, U.S. companies were found in just about every country to our south. The United Fruit Company operated in Costa Rica from 1899 until 1984, and the economic significance of bananas and the United Fruit Company to Costa Rica was profound. The United Fruit Company was responsible for 58% of the country's exports. They employed 14% of all agriculture workers, and it was 7% of their total employment throughout the entire country. If you worked for United Fruit Company in Costa Rica, well, you were amongst the majority. The land concessions granted for banana cultivation in Costa Rica was situated in a remote location, in a region near Costa Rica's Caribbean coast. At the time, this area was sparsely populated, very distant from San Jose, the capital city, where just about everybody lived. This posed a challenge for the United Company. Bananas have a year-round growth cycle. The company required a steady, dedicated workforce that could reside and work in this isolated plantations constantly throughout the year. Seeing as there were few folks there to do the work, laborers would have to be enticed to move to the area. The folks who were going to do all the heavy lifting had an alternative job opportunity. The coffee growers were seasonal, allowing workers to earn a living and then have time off to enjoy their earnings. Add to this, coffee was being grown close to San Jose, which meant the workforce could live in the city. Working in the mountains was less humid and a lot cooler, plus, they were working with coffee. Banana grow best in low-lying areas where it was hot and humid. Mosquitoes loved these areas as well, which led to a lot of the workforce developing malaria. The workers who wanted to supplement their coffee income would take on work for the banana companies. They needed to be trained on when and how to harvest the fruit. As soon as it was time to pick the coffee again, the workforce would mostly vanish, and the fruit company would have to start all over again. Well, the fruit company began looking into how they could get workers to stay in less than hospitable locations. Working long hours in a hot, sticky environment doesn't sound like what most folks consider to be a good living. Mosquitoes are a huge problem that not only suck your blood, the response to biting is itching. You don't feel a mosquito bite. What you feel is your body pumping histamine to the bite so that you'll pay attention to your blood being taken. The female mosquito is the one that bites. It doesn't make any sound. That buzzing is made by the male mosquito, whose job it is to annoy you and allow the female to sneak in and suck out your red stuff. Male mosquitoes don't bite. The fruit company wasn't concerned with male or female bloodsuckers. They just wanted the workers to show up and not die. Dead folks do not pick bananas very well, unless they're zombies. Ooh, zombie banana pickers. Sounds like something I should put in a book. More people have died due to mosquito bites than all the lions and tigers and bears and sharks and murder noodles, man-eating jellyfish, and other creatures combined. Mosquitoes carry a bunch of nasty diseases that can kill off about 1 million people each year. When I was young, there was a concerted effort to wipe out all the mosquitoes on the planet. Every country had come together and said, "We're going to do away with those little blood-sucking pests." Sounds like a good plan to me. They sprayed huge clouds of DDT in the evening, right when the mosquitoes would come out. The entire planet was on board with wiping out this pest. Well, along comes someone who wrote a book. I'm not going to go into all of that, but a lot of people have died since that one book hit the shelves. A bunch of politicians were enthralled with this book, and the next thing we knew, the mosquitoes had won the war. I wonder if that person who wrote that book ever sits down and thinks to themselves, since I wrote that book, millions of people have died just because of that one book. Well, hospitals were built in these remote locations so that the Costa Rican workers who got sick were able to recover and then go back to work. The whole dead folks not picking bananas very well. Now, sick people don't pick bananas very well either. Malaria, well, that's a really weird disease. I knew a guy had it once. Whew. Anyway, housing was improved. The men doing the work wanted to see their families once in a while so they knew where their paycheck was going. Plus, it's nice to sit down to dinner with your family instead of all the guys you work with. Houses were built where families could live. Nice houses. The land around them had to be drained to get those bloodsuckers out of the neighborhood. Having kids around, the fruit company built schools so the youngins could be taught things like how to pick bananas. Oh, yeah, get them started at a young age. They were taught how wonderful the United Fruit Company was. Company towns tend to promote company ideas, and they ignore things like, a lot of civil rights and alternative ideas. They sure weren't teaching people the wonders of coffee. The fruit company also built parks so that families would have some place to hang out when they weren't working. A huge problem we ran into with new agents in the Border Patrol who came to Laredo was their families felt left out. Most people in Laredo speak Spanish. A lot speak both Spanish and English. But if you're going to go shopping, you will probably run into the folks that do not speak a lot of English. Well, family members would discover they were unable to communicate with about half of the city. This led to a lot of wives wanted their husbands to get a transfer to some sector with a more English speaking population. Transfers were hard to get, and this would lead to an ultimatum: transfer or divorce. You know, the old saying, when mama ain't happy. We lost a lot of guys who quit and moved to keep their families, or they wound up without families. Sector, of course, did zero to alleviate this issue. Keep the family happy and keep the workers. Well, that was not their problem. You want a job? Well, that was it. Banana harvesting didn't pay as well as coffee, but coffee companies didn't offer free housing, schools, or health care. People looked into the banana companies for all of the benefits, not paying attention to the lower cash amount. The fruit company actually came out ahead since they only had to build houses and schools once, and they used them as long as they didn't fall down. Add to this, nobody wanted to get fired because they would have to find a new place for their families. Workers had less tendency to take off sick or work fewer hours. Researchers looking into the fruit company run towns were all thinking they would discover near poverty level living. Instead, they found the people living in these company towns were actually financially and educationally in far better shape than the people living in other parts of Costa Rica. Wages that didn't have to go to housing, education, and healthcare went into other things, making their lives a much higher standard of living than the rest of the country. It wasn't all warm hugs and pats on the back. The closer the banana plantations were to the coffee plantations, the better the amenities. Coffee growers paid better but didn't have company housing, schools, and hospitals. In the long run, even with lower wages, the banana harvesters were able to keep more of their pay. The government of Costa Rica was able to keep the two major political parties in control of just about everything, while the country around them were subject to coups and overthrows on a regular basis. The workers were mostly happy with what they were getting, and outside influences had little impact. You know, most revolutions, most things like that, where the people rise up and take over most of those are started from outside of the country. The workers were happy with what they were getting, and so they didn't pay any attention to those rabble rousers. The elections were not very honest, but the two parties managed to keep the appearance of doing what was best for the people, while making billions of dollars. Costa Rica was just one place that the United Fruit Company wanted to control. They also began buying up land in Guatemala and Colombia. The Colombian government was more than happy to sell huge chunks of land cheap to the fruit company. The cash mostly wound up in private bank accounts. Profits were huge in Guatemala, and the company wanted more out of them and Colombia. Instead of paying the workers in cash, the men doing all the back-breaking work received something called company script. This was like cash, only it could only be used in company-owned stores. You could buy anything you wanted as long as the company supplied it. 1928, the Colombian banana workers went on strike. They wanted higher pay and in real money that could be used anywhere in the country. An army regiment from Bogota was dispatched by the government to deal with the strikers, which it deemed a bunch of subversives. At the time, nobody seemed willing to say the military were getting their marching orders from the fruit company. 300 soldiers were sent from Antigua to Magdalena. The soldiers already stationed in Magdalena were not involved because General Cortez Vargas, the army appointed military chief of the Banana Zone, didn't think that these soldiers would be willing to put down a strike that involved their family members, since most of the soldiers were from the area. On the day of the massacre, December 5th, 1928, about 1,500 banana workers, along with their families, were in the town square of Cienega. The people had gathered after Sunday Mass to wait for an anticipated address from the governor. The troops set up their machine guns on the roofs of low buildings at the corners of the main square. Then they closed off the square, not allowing anyone in or out. They told the people gathered there they had 5 minutes to leave after they closed the streets. Well, after the 5 minutes were up, they began shooting into a mass of unarmed civilians. Family members, women, children, machine gun bullets. Don't really know who they hit, and they don't really care. General Vargas, who commanded the troops during the massacre, said there were 47 casualties. In reality, the exact number has never been confirmed. 4 machine guns being fired into a mass of people from all directions. 47 casualties. They were either getting their ammunition from China or the people doing the counting were blind. The number of dead is somewhere closer to 2 to 3,000. But we'll never know for sure because the bodies were quickly dumped into the ocean. You got to feed those sharks. Among the survivors was Luis Vicente Gomez, later a famous local figure who survived by hiding under a bridge for 3 days. Every year after the massacre, he delivered a memorial service on the radio. The United Fruit Company acted as if this whole affair was the fault of the military, going above and beyond the orders from the government. Definitely not their fault. I imagine some of y'all are wondering, so what does this have to do with secrets? The world is a strange place. Sometimes things are going on around us that might seem quite mundane until you look closer. Eddie Russett's dad said, "What do you find when you lift the rug? Dirt." During the first 60 years of their existence, the U.S.-owned banana companies learned to use local governments as instruments of their will. From 1898 to 1920, President Manuel Estrada Cabrera invited the United Fruit Company to build Guatemala's infrastructure, railroads, telegraph lines, and ports. General George Ubico, in office from 1933 to 44, continued to be subservient towards this company and repress civil unrest. He was a president for the company and by the company as opposed to for the people that elected him. Well, they probably didn't elect him. Poor countries tend to have poor leaders. As the fruit company moved in, they offered huge rewards to the folks in charge, who were, like most politicians, in it for themselves. Bananas grew well in Guatemala's rich soil. Work was cheap since the folks living there had few choices. Some fruit companies actually paid their workers well. They also worked them long and hard hours, but good paying jobs are usually demanding. Folks here in the U.S. wanted exotic fruit, and bananas were good and not too expensive. A boatload would arrive, and the docks would be overrun by merchants wanting to get their goods out to the stores as soon as possible. After all, bananas don't stay yellow very long. The conglomerate pursued an aggressive vertical integration strategy aiming to own and control every aspect of banana production and distribution, from the tree to the market. It acquired railroads and telegraph companies as subsidiaries, which it used to pitch itself as the credible partner for development and modernization, which helped it win land concessions. The better they told people they were, the more things they got. Through a subsidiary company, the United Fruit Company owned and controlled not just the banana business and the land the plantations were on, but most of the country, most important infrastructures, railways, hospitals, ports, and the telegraph lines. They pretty much owned the newspapers. 1944, the balance of power began to shift in Guatemala. The initial sparks were kindled by the middle class. School teachers went on strike, and Ubico's government responded with heavy-handed actions and repression. You shouldn't be mean to school teachers. It's bad business, but anytime people discover that they're sick and tired of being ruled by folks who don't have their best interests at heart, people will push back. A good government will listen to its people and try to do what is right. There aren't very many good governments out there. Most are, well, in it for themselves. The desire for democratic rule spread. As the government tried to put down any reforms, this only led to more people waking up and wanting a new master. 1944 political parties were formed in Guatemala for the first free election in 15 years. In Tiquisate on the Pacific coast, workers from the United Fruit Company went on strike. After 15 days, the company agreed to a 15% wage hike. Once the strike was over, Ubico jailed the strike leaders. The dictatorship faced internal problems as well. A couple of junior army officers, including Jacob Arbenz, led a rebellion at Fort Matamoros. In the ensuing battle, a total of 1,800 loyalists and rebels died. General Ubico, handpicked successor, resigned, and Arbenz called for elections. The Guatemalan army was not in very good shape until the U.S. began supporting them. The soldiers were armed and clothed with U.S. equipment. The government was happy not having to pay for the upkeep of its military, and so they allowed outside influences in just about all their internal affairs. 1945, university professor Juan Jose Arevalo became the president of Guatemala. The ratification of a new constitution the same year led to a labor law with far-reaching benefits for the people of Guatemala. The landowners, elite, the land-owning elites had become used to the state furthering their own interests above all else. The Arevalo regime found itself under constant attack from outside influences. Military coups became the norm. The government spent most of its time and resources trying to hold on to power. 1947, the Ministry of Labor was established. For the first time, the state would oversee the conduct of the planters. The United Fruit Company refused to obey any of the new labor laws. In 1948, Arevalo's government arbitrated a strike on the United Fruit Company's plantations. The fruit company aggressively ramped up its campaign of anti-communism. How saying a country that was looking out for its own people instead of some foreign company is a communist government is beyond me, but then I am not one of the Dulles brothers. 1953, for the first and only time in history, two brothers were appointed to head the covert and overt sides of American policy. President Dwight Eisenhower appointed John Foster Dulles as Secretary of State and Allen Dulles, Director of the CIA. The brothers saw Marxism, of Bolshevism, and communism as a principal threat to the power of multinational companies in the world, not to freedom of humans or the rights of citizens to own things. No, it was the power of multinational companies. They were both worried about radical change. They felt that the world could go crazy if it didn't allow business to function freely. As far as they were concerned, the world economy, the security and happiness of all the world's people, depended on the ability of American corporations to function freely throughout the world. Plus, they were heavily invested in many of these huge companies. They together would speak They would speak together several times a day, either by phone or directly over lunch and dinner. When it came to countries not allowing giant U.S. companies to run roughshod over their citizens, the two would quickly come up with plans to do something about it. In the 17th century, a horse that was roughshod was shod with horseshoes with nail heads or metal points projecting from the bottoms of the shoes. This gave the horse better traction on slippery ground and ice, but when cavalry horses were roughshod, they became brutal weapons in a charge against foot soldiers. Getting run over by a horse is bad, but getting run over by a roughshod horse is just nasty. As the ruthlessness of the planter elite, working hand in hand with the United Fruit Company, increased, their actions were matched by increased militancy in the newly formed labor unions. Unlike most unions here in the U.S., the unions in Central America were more closely aligned with their governments. President Jacobo Arbenz took office in 1951. In an effort to change the government's actions, the United Fruit Company laid off 3,000 workers and simply let their plantations sit unattended. The president offered to buy out the fruit company. He offered to pay $1,185,000 for all the land the fruit company owned inside Guatemala. This was not an arbitrary amount. The fruit company had valued the land it owned at just over $1 million when paying its taxes to the government each year. The United Fruit Company made President Arbenz an offer. If he wanted to run his country the way he saw fit, it would cost him $19 million. This was what they valued the land and the improvements that they had made that they didn't want to simply walk away from without a profit. The emboldened Guatemalan government aimed to break the backs of the corporate ownership of their country. They decriminalized labor unions and built public infrastructure to compete with the private infrastructure built by the fruit company. The agrarian reform law was posed to expropriate and redistribute 1.5 million acres of land to 100,000 Guatemalan families. June 17, 1952, Arbenz issued Decree number 900 to distribute land to the not so wealthy folks, the peasants. This decree enabled the government to expropriate uncultivated land on any farm larger than 223 acres. The United Fruit Company had abandoned farms because of the Panama disease. The government redistributed 100,000 acres, compensating former landholders based on the amount that they had stated their land was worth when they filed their taxes. The United Fruit Company had been cheating on its taxes by grossly underreporting the value. The fruit company not only owned vast amounts of land, they had paid for most of the improvements to the railroads and ports. Just about every business in Guatemala had some form of modernization from the company. The company was not going to get anything back for these improvements in non agricultural projects, and because they had skimped on tax appraisals, they were not going to get most of their land investment back either. The land about to go to Guatemalan workers wound up being gobbled up by foreigners from other countries that had arrived to get their piece of the pie. The government was more intent on giving the fruit company a black eye than giving their citizens a hand up. Folks from all over the world that had moved to Guatemala wound up getting most of the land. The United Fruit Company wasn't about to go down without a fight. They did the one thing the government of Guatemala was not ready for. They went to Washington. A delegation of company men went to President Eisenhower and pled their case. Eisenhower had zero power to do anything in Central America countries, but he did have the full power and support of the CIA. Allen Dulles told President Eisenhower that President Arbenz was a commie. His plans to take over all the land belonging to the fruit company was a Russian ploy to get a foothold in a country to our south. This was 7 years before Cuba was taken over by Castro. When Allen Dulles was gearing up for an overthrow of the Arbenz government, his brother John Dulles participated in the instigation of a military coup by the Guatemalan army used by the CIA by claiming the democratically elected Guatemalan president Jacobo Arbenz and the Guatemalan government were veering towards communism. Dulles had previously represented the United Fruit Company as their lawyer. Thomas Dudley Cabot, former CEO of the United Fruit, held the position of Director of International Security Affairs in the State Department. John Moore Cabot, the brother of Thomas Cabot, was Secretary of Inter-American Affairs during most of the coup planning from 1953 to 54. Haven't you ever wondered why it is that every time some president gets elected, his entire cabinet comes from these companies it's like, why is that guy being put in charge of things? Well, that's how things work. The people who were supposed to be advising President Eisenhower on affairs were doing everything they could to remove a legally elected president of a foreign nation. They were doing the bidding of the United Fruit Company that at one time they had all worked for. The United Fruit Company hired public relations guru Edward Bernays to lead a two-pronged assault, one on the public and the other on the U.S. government. Edward Louis Bernays was born November 22nd, 1891. His mother was Sigmund Freud's sister, and his father was the brother of Freud's wife. His dad was a brother-in-law twice to Freud. He was an American pioneer in the public relations and propaganda, and he referred to in his obituary as the father of public relations. Bernays worked for the United Fruit Company in the early 40s. His objective was promoting banana sales within the United States. He did this by claiming that bananas were extremely healthy for you, and if you ate them, your physical health would improve. He got celebrities to be photographed holding a banana or two. Bernays also sent bunches to hotels and other conspicuous places so that people would see them and want to buy them. Bernays said that United Fruit needed to put a positive spin on the banana growing countries. Pictures of smiling workers in the fields and kids playing in the parks. He created a front group called the Middle American Information Bureau, which supplied information to journalists and academics. No need to travel to Central America and ask questions. All the information is right here in this handy dandy folder. Bernays was the guy who drew people's income away from what they needed to spend it on and things that they didn't know that they wanted until he told them they did. Growing up, we had one TV set, and the phone was attached to the wall. Today, folks have a TV in every room, and you're a nobody if you don't have the latest and greatest Apple 4001 cell phone. Bernays was hired to campaign against Arbenz government and at the same time convinced the rest of the world that his government was a communist front for the Ruskies. It was for the good of the world to get rid of this man. Arbenz did have politicians from the Communist Party within his coalition. They were a legitimate group in the country and were to be represented by the government. The United States Department intervened on behalf of the United Fruit Company, advising the Arbenz government it should compensate the company that $16 million they had decided the land was worth once it was in jeopardy of being seized. That whole thing about misevaluating the land for tax purposes, that was just good business practice. In the mid-1953, President Eisenhower authorized the CIA to overthrow Arbenz. To achieve this overthrow, the CIA recruited a disgruntled ex-Arbenz military officer named Carlos Castillo Armas. I hear that word disgruntled a lot, which led me to wonder, can you be gruntled? A gruntled is a verb that means to put in a happy humor. It is the opposite of disgruntled, which means to make ill-humored or discontented. So next time you're at work and somebody asks how you're doing, tell them you're gruntled and see what they say. If you're at the post office, they're probably going to run out the door. Armas rallied anti-government sentiment and pieced together an army of a few hundred men. They were supplied and supported with U.S. equipment and intelligence under the Operation PB Success. I don't know if that means pro-banana success or something else. PB Success, pro-banana. On June 15, 1954, U.S.-backed mercenaries left their bases in Honduras to invade Guatemala. They were led by Colonel Carlos Castillo Armas, known as the Armas Army. Former dock workers for the United Fruit Company in Puerto Barris managed to hold the rebels off. I'm wondering, were these dock workers armed or what? The Guatemalan government arrived and they managed to drive the rebel forces back into Honduras. What kind of training did these guys receive that a bunch of dock workers were able to outfight them? Good Lord. The invasion failed, but Arbenz had been shaken. He was overwhelmed by bogus news manufactured in a Miami radio station. The military was paralyzed. June 18, 1954, Armas and his men attacked with the help of logistical support from the U.S. The CIA began by launching a propaganda campaign warning the Guatemalan public and Arbenz that a major invasion was underway, setting up a clandestine radio station that jammed Guatemalan signals and flooded the airwaves with greatly exaggerated messages. It is not true that the waters of Lake Atitlan have been poisoned, blared one message. At our command post here in the jungle, we are unable to confirm or deny the report that Castillo Armas has an army of 5,000 men. In reality, it was a few hundred. American pilots were sent in to bomb fortresses and other strategic points in Guatemala City. Isn't that an act of war? As bogus transmissions filled the airwaves, the CIA used spies within the Guatemalan military and government to actively undermine President Arbenz's authority, demoralizing his support and blocking efforts to counter Armas. The CIA operation to destroy democracy in Guatemala was as sophisticated and ruthless as the United Fruit Company's cultivation of North America's favorite fresh fruit, banana. Oh, sorry. I just had to do that. The heart of the campaign was psychological warfare, coupled with arming an expeditionary force out of Tegucigalpa and a barrage of propaganda carried over the company's tropical radio network, but disguised as La Voz de Liberación, or the Voice of Liberation. That sounded more French than Spanish, but I'm getting the two languages confused. The CIA's psychological warfare succeeded. Panic overtook the capital, and Arbenz supporters began to lose faith in him. When he attempted to raise his own militia, only a few hundred civilians showed up. Hey, he had more civilians than the attacking army had soldiers, but he didn't know that. Arbenz addressed the nation on the eve of being overthrown. Our only crime is consistent of decreeing our own laws and applying them to all without exception, he said. June 27, 1954, he resigned. He sought asylum at the Mexican embassy, and he later fled the country. Immediately after the coup, those former United Fruit Company workers from Puerto Barrios were targeted for some of the worst acts of violence. How dare you fight our soldiers? Invading you from another country. American authorities were pleased with the CIA coup. However, other countries didn't hesitate to make their disgust clear. When Allen Dulles described the coup as a victory for democracy over communism, a British officer likened his statement to Hitler speaking about Austria. Newspapers around the world condemned the Guatemalan coup, calling it economic colonialism. Calling the coup in Guatemala a victory for democracy proved to be a huge stretch. Armas promptly arrested several thousand opposition leaders, branding them as being communists, and he repealed the democratic constitution. Progressive reforms such as labor unions were dismantled, and the United Fruit Company was welcomed back in. All that land that had been given to the farmers was quickly returned to the fruit company. From 1960 to 1996, civil wars have swept the country. Leftist rebels with large degree of popular support fought against government forces who were being supplied with American weapons. The largest of these rebel groups was the Guerrilla Army of the Poor, a force of insurgents that included about 270,000 members at one point, mostly ethnic Mayan people. In an attempt to wipe out the opposition, the regime began a scorched earth policy against its opponents, systematically jailing and exterminating ethnic Mayans. A UN-sponsored commission for historical clarification in 1999 concluded the U.S. training of the officer corps in counterinsurgency techniques had a significant bearing on human rights violations during the armed confrontation. Today, this period of ethnic cleansing is known as the Guatemalan Genocide, or the Silent Holocaust. Somewhere around 200,000 people were killed, mostly indigenous Mayans. The CIA hid all the documentation pertaining to their involvement in Guatemala coup and the inhuman actions that followed. They were all hidden away until they were later destroyed, despite this being a violation of policy pertaining to official documents. Most of our problems today are direct results of yesterday's solutions. Politicians want quick results and are never interested in the long term effects of their knee jerk reactions. During the lead up and eventual coup in Guatemala, one of the people who happened to be there was a young Argentinian physician named Che Guevara. Later on, Che Guevara made his way to Mexico, where he met with Fidel Castro. Castro wanted to know what happened in Guatemala. The idea of being able to overthrow any government because it was democratically run was the foundation for the eventual dictatorship that ruled all of Cuba. They determined the CIA was able to succeed because Guatemala was an open society. To hold on to power in Cuba, there would be no voting, no free press, or independent organizations. After the revolution in Cuba, Castro made a speech with former Guatemalan President Arbenz sitting right next to him. Castro said that Cuba would not be like Guatemala. Any of you out there wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt? A lot of kids today think of him as a freedom fighter. The only fighting he did was after the Bautista government was out of the way. He was well known for shooting people that he didn't consider communist enough, unarmed civilians that couldn't shoot back. There used to be a lot of pictures of Che Guevara executing school teachers and people like that because he didn't think they were communist enough. As the CIA was overthrowing the government of Guatemala, the banana workers of Honduras initiated a strike that spread across their country. The CIA played things differently in Honduras, portraying the striking workers as having been manipulated by the communists from Guatemala. Behind the scenes, the U.S. negotiated a bilateral military agreement with Guatemala. With Honduras, establishing the institutional framework that would later be used 30 years later to arm and train the Contras in Honduran soil. As the U.S., mostly because of the CIA, was putting in dictators to run countries so the United Fruit Company could make millions, the countries became known as banana republics. Even as they espoused the virtues of democracy, the CIA was busy creating dictatorships so they could control foreign governments, acting as if this was to keep the world free from communism. When I think of bananas, I don't think of England. I picture banana plantations in Central and South America, or maybe even Asia. When I think of England, I think of Monty Python's Flying Circus, a Doctor Who, and The Repair Shop. I watch The Repair Shop because it's relaxing, while at the same time I'm learning a lot about what I don't know about how to fix things. At Chatworth's house, a stately home in Derbyshire, 4 miles northeast of Bakewell and 9 miles west of Chesterfield, England, the owners had a variety of interests. The Cavendish family had owned the property since 1549. Bananas had been grown at Chatworth since 1830, when the head gardener, Joseph Paxton, got his hands on a few specimens imported from Mauritius. He had apparently been inspired after seeing a banana plant depicted on Chinese wallpaper in one of the home's 175 rooms. Thinking this plant might look nice in the greenhouse, he bought a few and planted them. Bananas were only sold when a shipment managed to sail from far away, and the bananas didn't get squashed or eaten by rats while in transport. To get a load of bananas to the market, they had to be shipped while still green. They would ripen while in transit. Fruit will be far tastier if it ripens on the plant. November 1835, Paxton's plants finally flowered, and by the following May, it had over 100 bananas growing on it, one of which won a medal at that year's Horticultural Society show. A banana with a medal. The folks at Chatworth House had the best tasting bananas in all of England because they grew their own. They ripened on the plant. A few years later, the Duke supplied 2 cases of plants to a missionary named John Williams, who was heading to Samoa. Only one plant survived the journey, but it launched the banana industry in Samoa and other South Seas islands. As a reward for bringing the fruit to the island, Williams was killed by the locals. Well, that's not why they killed him, but they did invite him to a non-consensual death event. I'm going to make the most out of that Jasper Ford quote. Missionaries also took the Cavendish banana to the Pacific and the Canary Islands. The Cavendish spread, but it's only in relatively recent years that it has become the exporter's banana of choice. You can still find the Big Mike, but not in any stores. You'll have to buy the plant and grow your own. For decades, the most exported and therefore most important banana in the world was the Gros Michel, but in 1950s, it was practically wiped out by the fungus known as the Panana. I'm making words again. What's a Panama? The Panama disease. Go to the grocery store and ask them for a dozen Panamas. Oh, oi. Okay, the Panama disease or the banana wilt. As the Pana There I go again. As the Panama Next time I'm talking about Panama, I'll be calling it Panama. The Panama disease was killing off the minions' favorite fruit. The folks living at Chatworth House were growing bananas that turned out to be disease resistant. The Big Mike banana slowly disappeared from plantations and was replaced by the Cavendish banana. Practically every banana consumed in the Western world is directly descended from a plant grown in Derbyshire estate hothouse 180 years ago. The Big Mike was much more tasty, but it was also prone to dying in bunches, which made it not very tasty at all. Banana growers turned to the other breed that was immune to the fungus, the Cavendish. It is smaller and, by most people's accounts, not nearly as tasty, but it is capable of surviving global travel, and most importantly, it's able to grow in infected soil. Though banana growing habitats still have their own breeds, practically all bananas exported to foreign markets, such as Europe, UK, North America, are Cavendish, cloned from the first Cavendish plant that was shipped to the islands. A quarter of the bananas eaten in India are Cavendish, while practically all the bananas sold and consumed in China are descended from the Chatworth plant. I'm thinking of buying a few Big Mike banana plants and putting them in next to my Cavendish bananas. See if they survive in the Laredo heat. Water is a big problem. As I'm watering my plants, steam comes from the ground. Well, not quite that bad, but it sure is hot and dry here. They keep promising us rain every week, and it never happens. What I have to ask is how much money did the CIA get from all those banana machinations? Was it worth the thousands of deaths all piled up at their doorstep? Did the United Fruit Company ever come out and say, "We are so sorry that all those people had to die so we could make a profit"? Nope, never happened. The United Fruit Company changed their name to the Chiquita Banana Company. A banana wearing a fancy hat like Carmen Miranda and singing about bananas. Next time you're shopping at the grocery store and you see those yellow oblongs on the shelf, try not to think about all the nasty things that went on in the past to bring the world fresh fruit. Bananas are not evil unless you encounter Franken-Nanner. Any of y'all ever watch Danger Mouse? Well, that was a cartoon that I used to watch when I was an adult. That A banana that was brought back to life by sewing several bananas together. No, bananas are just really yummy fruit. I eat a bunch every week, as long as the store has them, and I still hold them up in the air and announce bananas anytime I'm in the store. The folks who want to have everything and tell everybody else how to live, those are evil people. Evil bananas? No. Evil banana companies? Yes. Okay, I hope I didn't ruin your favorite fruit out there. Just keep in mind, there's nothing wrong with bananas, only some of the companies that produce them. If you enjoyed the show, tell other people they should be listening as well. If you'd like to support the show, go to Amazon.com and buy one of my books, or buy all four. They make good presents, and Christmas is coming up. It's only, 6 months away? Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where there's strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.